President Corazon Aquino's speech before the U.S. Congress, September 18, 1986, by Corazon Aquino. Historical background of the author. Maria Corazon Coanco Aquino, or also known as Cory Aquino, was born on January 25, 1933 and died on August 1, 2009. She was born in a wealthy and politically inclined and banking family in Tarlac province. Also, she was the sixth among the 8 children of Jose Coanco, which is a former congressman. At the age of 13, she attended school in Manila, where she graduated as a valedictorian and then finished her education in Philadelphia, United States, and later on in New York City. She took the bachelor's degree in French and mathematics from College of Mount St. Vincent in 1953. Upon returning in the Philippines, she met Benigno Simeon Aquino Jr., who is a journalist at that time and later on became a politician. They marry each other and after on they have 5 children together. Cory Aquino returned to the Philippines and she studied law in Far Eastern University in 1953, and that's the place she met her husband, who came also from a wealthy family. She stopped her education and married Ninoy in 1954, having 4 daughters and 1 son, namely Maria Elena, Aurora Corazon, Victoria Elisa, Cristina Bernadette, and Benigno Simeon III. Benigno Aquino, her husband, became a prominent opposition politician and he is imprisoned during the time Marcos declared the martial law in the Philippines, which strips off the democratic rights of the citizens. Marcos declared martial law on September 21, 1972, and Ninoy Aquino was one of those who got arrested during the martial law and later on sentenced to death. When his husband returned in the Philippines in 1983, Ninoy Aquino was killed. Marcos was the one being accused as the mastermind of the assassination. After his husband's death, Cory Aquino evolved into a national symbol of reform. Ninoy Aquino died on August 21, 1983 in the staircase leading to tarmac of the Manila International Airport, which is known today as Ninoy Aquino International Airport. In February 1986, Marcos unexpectedly called for presidential elections and chose Aquino as the opposite candidate. She didn't win against Marcos, but Aquino challenged the result by leading the People Power Revolution, or the EDSA Revolution, against the regime, violence, and electoral fraud of Marcos and prompting to seek exile in Hawaii. After the death of his husband, Cory became active in protesting against Marcos' regime and became symbolic figurehead as an anti-Marcos and ran for presidency against Marcos, but she totally lost. Aquino's loss triggered the Filipinos, who are tired of Marcos' violence and intimidation, and they protest against Marcos, and that's how EDSA Revolution began. And after that, people of the Philippines won against Marcos and get back our democracy. In February 25, 1986, Aquino was declared as the first female president of the Philippines, and the Marcos regime is done. During her 6 years of being the president, she failed to handle the economic problems and social reforms of our country, and her reputation declined as she continually outcries over economic injustice and political corruption. Aquino administration failed to undertake fundamental socio-economic problems, unlike our economy in the hands of former President Marcos, which gained a steady growth for several years. In 2008, she discovered that she had a colon cancer and later on died on August 1, 2009, in the Makati Medical Center due to cardiorespiratory arrest at the age of 76.
Historical background of the document. After winning the snap election held on February 7, 1986, Corazon Aquino held a speech during the joint session of the U.S. Congress on September 18, 1986. Before becoming and being declared as the first female president of the Philippines, former President Marcos reigned for 20 years from 1965 until early 1986. During his time as a president, he was known to be a corrupt dictator, with Forbes listing him as the second of the world's all-time most corrupt leaders. Also during his regime, many people or civilians were imprisoned, tortured, and got killed. The Philippines went under martial law on September 1972. He was already re-elected as president for the second term. To extend his term and to remain as the president, he declared martial law. Saying that he won't step down as a president, and after the assassination of Ninoy, Marcos declared a snap election. It was held on November 1985, where Corazon Aquino ran against Marcos. After hesitating, she had then decided, with the help by millions of people, that she will run as a president with his running mate Salvador Laurel to fight for democracy. Marcos won, and the result of the election was clearly fraudulent. On February 15, Marcos was proclaimed as the winner of the February 7 elections. Cory didn't stop and believed that the vote was rigged, that there was an election fraud despite of hundreds of thousands of people who volunteered to protect the electoral process from fraud. She called for a massive civil disobedience and is known as the People Power Revolution. 1986 EDSA People Power Revolution gathered millions of Filipinos to march along EDSA, or Epifanio de los Santos Avenue. The peaceful rally was meant to oust the dictator and to support Aquino as the president that the Filipinos wanted. The People Power Revolution was known to be a remarkable event in the Philippine history. 2 weeks after the snap election marked as the end of the Marcos regime. The Marcos fled to Hawaii and Aquino was declared as the real winner of the snap elections and marked the new beginning for the Philippines as a democratic country with Cory Aquino as the president. President Corazon Aquino delivered her speech during the joint session of the U.S. Congress on September 18, 1986. The purpose of the meeting or session of the U.S. Congress is to hear an address by an important figure, especially leaders of a foreign country. Members of the House and Senate are gathered together to hear an important speech by a guest speaker.
Content analysis.
In the first 8 paragraphs, Corazon Aquino spoke about her late husband, Ninoy Aquino. She spoke about his sacrifices, his tortures, and his eventual death. She told the U.S. Congress about the journey of her husband for the Philippines' independence and freedom from the dictatorship of the Marcos regime. Benigno Ninoy Aquino Jr. of the Liberal Party was elected senator to Congress that had an abundance of Marcos Nacionalista Party. He caught the eye of Marcos due to his belief of democracy in his dictatorship. He detained Ninoy and even tortured him. The news of Ninoy's torture did not even reach his family, which worries them. She also talked about the harsh reality during Marcos' regime, such as suspending the Constitution and detaining senators, publishers, writers, or anyone in general who spoke about democracy. During Marcos' strict regime, no one has truly achieved freedom. Everything was heavily restricted, and the word democracy was among them. Anyone who talks about democracy were detained. When Marcos was preparing for his third term, militant students, farmers, and workers were picketing at the Malacanang Palace who were violently dispersed by military troopers. She also received the news of his passing in Boston. She also told them that 2 million people escorted him to his grave, and this is where the revolution began. She participated in the 1984 election despite people telling that it was rigged. Ninoy Aquino was killed on August 21, 1983, when he was assassinated at the Manila International Airport. President Corazon Aquino stated that 2 million people went and escorted him to his grave. At this moment, President Aquino decided to participate for the 1984 elections. She still decided to participate even though she was being told by the lawyers of the opposition. Her candidates won 56 seats out of 183. Publisher Joaquin Chino Roses launched CAPM, or the Cory Aquino for President movement. Cory agreed to run for presidency if Marcos called for a snap election, and if the CAPM gathered 1 million signatures would secure and endorse her candidacy. She won the election and became the first Filipina president. During her meeting de Advance, she had an estimated million gatherers, which is one of the largest political gatherings in the nation's history. She became the President of the Philippines from February 25, 1986 to June 30, 1992. This is known as the triumph of the peaceful people power revolution.
President Aquino showed her gratitude to the Americans for their policy reform, which influenced the social-political atmosphere in the Philippines. She highlighted how Filipinos showed their disagreement in the victory of Marcos, which eventually led to protests that proclaimed her as president afterwards. She added that her faith and the necessity of the people for her obligation made her presidency possible. Moreover, Aquino reminded the audience about the ill government system under his predecessor Marcos. She talked about how the regime violates human rights and disabled the people in their power to oppose the bad governance and the lesson that Filipino people should learn from that experience. She also promised to be the instrument of peace for the country and never go against the achievement of such. She strengthened her promise by looking back again at Marcos' regime and its threat to democracy and peace. Meanwhile, Aquino gave appreciation and value to the Philippines' foreign debt of $26 billion and said it should be honored as it can be a great way to lift up people from previous slavery. Before ending her speech, Aquino relates the fulfillment of new democracy to the achievement of good governance of Americans. She pointed out that it was also the sacrifice of lives and treasure to bring back peace over the American lands. She ended her speech by reminiscing and giving her gratitude to Americans for the peaceful living of her husband, and their children, and then welcomed the Americans for building and strengthening democracy with the Philippines as both countries finally had their power to maintain freedom. Contributions and relevance of the document in understanding the grand narrative of Philippine history. Cory Aquino's speech was guided by the references to her husband, former Senator Ninoy Aquino. It was when the former President Corazon C. Aquino gave a speech to the United States Congress in September 1986, in which she called on America to help our country in maintaining the freedom. Her speech was to connect Ninoy's struggle with that of the whole nation, all the while interlinking their family's history with that fate of the entire country. She justified her presence in front of the U.S. Congress using symbolic words and figurative language, alluding to her connection with the late Ninoy on one hand and satisfying her command to the Filipino people on the other. She succeeded in her analysis of the martial law era regarding its origin and outcome. The following are some of the contributions and relevance of Corazon Aquino's speech. First, former President Cory Aquino broke the stereotype that only men can rule the nation, and that women are also capable of making a change for the betterment of its people. The first elected president of the Philippines was Emilio Aguinaldo on year 1898. After 88 years of existence of the Philippine Republic, the first ever woman president was elected. It is indeed a history. We are aware that even the earliest time, men are seen to be the one who's capable of leading a barangay. But Corazon Aquino broke that stereotype, therefore strengthening women empowerment and proving women leadership. Second, We cannot entrust our redemption to another sovereign state, and the only real solution to any type of rebellion is to address the causes. Solving the root problem will encourage everything else to inevitably fall into place. And Corazon Aquino was able to unify the opposition against the Marcos dictatorship, and her personality contributed in no small way to keeping the fight against Marcos peaceful. Third, she made us come together as people to reflect on what we owe the nation, each other, and ourselves. Fourth, it marks a new beginning for the Filipino and to its government. Corazon Aquino was the icon of democracy and the mother of Philippine people power. And the U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton said that Aquino helped bring democracy back to the Philippines after so many years of authoritarian rule within a faith in her country and its people that never wavered. The Filipino people were inspired by her quiet strength and her unshakable commitment to justice and freedom. Declares the freedom of the Filipinos from the Marcos regime. To the Filipino people, Corazon Aquino will always be remembered as the inspirational leader in the fight to restore democracy and dignity to our country after decades of dictatorship under the presidency of Ferdinand E. Marcos. Learning experiences.
Corazon Aquino's speech highlighted the events of one of the most memorable pieces of our history, the Philippines People Power Revolution. Here we have learned about the restricted and terrifying Marcos regime, which simply silenced and took away the democracy of our country. We have learned about the sacrifices of various revolutionary people who strives to get our independence, most notably mentioned in the speech, Ninoy and Corazon Aquino.
Ninoy's strong willpower that helped him survive the various tortures while being detained for his hope of freedom for the Philippines, and Cory's fearlessness. What we have learned and amazed by is that the then President Corazon Aquino was not afraid to take on the Marcos regime. She went to all lengths just to secure her place in the candidacy and eventually won the title the first Filipina president. Their fearlessness, courage, and determination should be traits inhabited by our fellow Filipinos. There are times that government tries to silence us, but upon learning and analyzing this document, we should not be silenced any further. We are a democratic country and we are free to speak and call out the ineffectiveness and wrongdoings of our government.
We have learned that unity will win at all odds. Our voice is the most powerful weapon that we can use to survive and make changes. This document or speech gives us empowerment, freedom, and inspiration in doing what is right. We believe that a good leader is not just a leader by name, but a leader with passion and dedication in making his or her plans into action. A leader who is driven not just by the people's need, but driven by his or her desire to achieve peace for all. In addition, we will not be swayed by our struggles. Rather, it will serve as a challenge and a motivation for us to strive harder in making this nation a wonderful and happy place to live in.